Welcome back to the Conscious Monogamy Series. Today is the third part of this series. You don't have to watch these in order, by the way, and this can apply to anyone who's living with a primary partner. Keep that in mind. Today we're going to look at 3 very common communication habits that will quietly erode your relationship over time, and then we're going to look at what are 3 conscious communication habits that actually feed your relationship over time. So let's get into it. If you're deeply committed to your relationship, but keep getting pulled into the same reactive loops that feel disconnecting, you're not alone. I'm Forrest Williams, certified relationship coach, and I guide devoted couples to untangle the unconscious dynamics that get in the way of intimacy and quietly erode connection over time. Here, we explore conscious relating as a spiritual practice, where your relationship becomes a sanctuary for healing, growth, and a steady source of joy instead of struggle. If you're new to this series, it's important to know that unconscious monogamy just defaults to the mainstream. The mainstream paradigm is a paradigm of war, and so it inevitably leads to disconnection. The mainstream paradigm is not a paradigm of connection. We're working on changing that, and if you're listening to this podcast, you're part of that change. But it's imperative, if lifelong relationship is important to you, you have to do it consciously, whether it's monogamous or not. But when we're looking at the context of conscious monogamy, what we actually mean is making a custom relationship that is true to you, true to your partner, and true to the both of you as a couple. Because relationships cannot be commodified. They're all unique, and it's not just a one-size-fits-all. So if you're going to do it consciously, it's going to look different than how your friends are doing it. And that's beautiful and natural. Diversity is the norm. And when we look at unconscious monogamy, what you get is enmeshment, codependency, and there's a lot of control in that dynamic, which leads to disconnection. So let's look at communication, right? Communication is a huge topic. There's so many communication habits and patterns to look at. I'm just going to share 3 with you for the sake of our own sanity. I could probably talk for a few hours, but we're going to keep this simple. This isn't going to be fully comprehensive. I'm just choosing 3 that seem to stand out to me when I'm doing sessions with folks, when I'm noticing patterns. But let me know in the comments, which communication patterns do you fall into or have you grown from that maybe I'm not sharing in here today? Because I'm not pretending like I'm covering all of them. So before I share the 3 with you, I want to share with you just the general, what is the unconscious way of communicating in a romantic relationship? So what generally happens in unconscious monogamy when you're defaulting to the societal norm, to your default programming, what you got programmed with in your family unit, what's happening is you're communicating at a surface level. There's a lot that's not being said, and you're not communicating the deeper layers. Maybe you grew up in a family unit where there wasn't a lot of maybe like deeper processing, but just emotional reacting. And so in conscious monogamy, the way that you communicate is by responding, not reacting, meaning there's a buffer in between when you're feeling triggered or even having any kind of feeling. You're not just off the cuff communicating, and you might think, oh, but that sounds unnatural or that sounds limiting. But what we're looking at is the lizard brain and the default programming. So if there's 0 pause or 0 conscious choice, conscious thinking, conscious communicating, you're just defaulting to that war norm, even if it's completely unconscious, because I don't think intentionally you would be like, yeah, let me communicate from a paradigm of war. You know what I mean? That would be crazy. But in conscious monogamy, the way you communicate is by being intentional. You're responding, not reacting, and you're getting to the root of what are you needing. That's the general theme. Now let's look at communication patterns within unconscious monogamy. So this is the default paradigm where you're not really thinking, you're just kind of responding from your lizard brain. It's just whatever the automatic habit is, your default programming, that's where you're communicating from. So in unconscious monogamy, you're not really getting to the deeper layers of communication. You're just responding to the surface level reaction that you're having emotionally. And what I find as a phenomenon is when people enter the dating scene, they'll say, oh, well, I'm not going to show my crazy, quote unquote, until 6 months in, or until 3 months in, or until we say I love you or something, right? But this whole concept of showing your crazy, like your crazy side, is really saying like, I'm gonna, at some point when I feel safe in the relationship, I'm gonna unfilter. I'm not gonna be conscious at all. I'm gonna stop trying, and I'm just gonna default to whatever dysfunctional pattern I learned from childhood. That's what that actually means, right? That's a translation. In unconscious monogamy, you give yourself a hall pass to be unfiltered, particularly with your romantic partner. It could be that you speak to your romantic partner in a way where you would never speak to a friend, definitely not a coworker. That's a whole different context. But what I'm saying is like, if you were in a public social situation, it's going to be completely different from how you speak to a romantic partner in unconscious monogamy, because you might give yourself more permission to be dysfunctional, to emotionally lash out, right? Or to communicate from that wounded inner child, which everyone has. That's a natural part of being human. It's very low effort. You're just running on autopilot. It's really not your highest self. But that's the difference, right? Is the intention. So in unconscious monogamy, there is no intention to grow or to heal, really. You're just like, well, I'm going to replicate whatever happened in my family, but I'm going to wait until I'm safe enough to do it, because I'm going to wait till this person's emotionally hooked, maybe through sexual chemistry, the way you bond, like on an oxytocin level, you get kind of hooked into each other. I'm going to wait until we get hooked into each other before I show my dysfunction, basically. Versus with conscious monogamy, your intention is not to be dysfunctional, right? And like, I have my own dysfunctions, okay? Everyone's got it, because the mainstream paradigm is dysfunctional. Maybe you're one of those rare people that grew up in a functional home, but in the empire, that's not the norm. So in conscious monogamy, you are oriented towards healing and growth, not only on your own, but in your partnership. And that is what makes relating so delicious, is it becomes actually a vessel for healing and growing. You can inspire each other's growth. And that's not the sole purpose of the relationship. That's just an added bonus, because there's so much more to life than just healing and growing. Personally, I believe life is about pleasure. Like, can you enjoy your life, especially when the world is on fire? Because if you're just waiting on external circumstances to get better, if you don't enjoy yourself, life might feel really long and hard, And so it's like, what's the point of being here on earth, right? Part of it is to learn and grow, but a big part of it is just to like enjoy the human experience, man. Like the ups and the downs, all of it. So in unconscious monogamy, you're not thinking at all. You're just running on autopilot. In conscious monogamy, you are taking responsibility for your wounded inner child. You're doing the reparenting, right? And you're communicating from your higher self. And conscious relating doesn't mean that you're communicating perfectly or you're communicating consciously 100% of the time. That's not at all what it is, actually. Because healing and growing is a messy process. It's nonlinear. Conscious monogamy is all about the intention to heal and grow. It's the self-awareness to reflect on, okay, what were my childhood dynamic? What was the family dynamic in my child growing up? What were the patterns? What was the family system? What role did I play? How did that impact my communication? You don't need to have all the answers, but it's getting into that curious inquiry about, where am I starting from? What is my default template? What is my default programming? And working with that. It's observing yourself and noticing, oh, I just slipped into some unconscious communication pattern, right? Whereas with unconscious monogamy, you're not tracking that thing. It's not important to you. Growth and healing just isn't a priority. You just want to live comfortably, right? You want to do the thing that's familiar and predictable, and you're not really living a life that's all about change and transformation, just ease and, I guess, familiarity. So let's get into some examples. The first unconscious communication habit is lashing out or attacking when you're feeling triggered. So this just means that you're taking it personally. You're feeling attacked when you're triggered, and you're emotionally reacting to your interpretation of what's going on. So there's the reality of what's going on. Let's give an example. Maybe I say, hey, I'm not available to offer emotional support right now. I'm really sorry, but let's check back in 20 minutes. Maybe I'll be more resourced then. And maybe your lizard brain goes to a place where it's like, well, you don't love me. So there's what's being said, right? And then there's the interpretation. In unconscious monogamy, you are emotionally reacting to the interpretation. So I might be saying, hey, I'm not available right now to offer emotional support in this moment. Your interpretation is, you don't love me. And you're not saying that out loud because that's the unconscious part, right? You're not consciously thinking, you don't love me. But you're reacting emotionally to that feeling of, you don't love me. If you're feeling neglected or abandoned or attacked, where it's like, how could you do this thing to me? How could you not be available for me when I need you? The unconscious reaction is to lash out or to attack. You're taking things personally instead of bringing some curious inquiry into what am I interpreting and how is that making me feel and what am I needing? And you might even threaten to end the relationship, right? You might escalate it into a fight. You might think unconsciously, well, if you don't love me, and then you'd say out loud, maybe this relationship isn't going to work out. So you're kind of threatening the relationship. It's the counterattack. You perceive you're being attacked by your partner's unavailability, and then you're offering a counterattack, which honestly is obviously really horrible for trust to threaten the end of the relationship. That's the lowest blow you can do when it comes to feeling secure in a relationship, right? The whole idea is long-term relating and really lifelong relating if you're here in this podcast. And so if you're threatening the end of the relationship because you're emotionally reacting, that can be recovered from, but not fully, honestly. It takes time to heal from that, and it's hard to undo. You can't really undo that. So that's one example. In conscious relating, you observe the interpretation, you notice the body sensations that are coming up, and you pause, take a breath before responding. One of my favorite practices in conscious relating is repeating back what you understood the person say. This is such a simple practice. It's not easy necessarily, but super simple and super effective. I have seen very positive results in a very short amount of time with some couples that I've worked with this practice. It is very effective. It's harder than it might sound because it really slows down the conversation. So an example is, I say, I'm not available to give emotional support right now. If you're feeling triggered, it might feel really intense in your body, but repeating back what you hear really buys you some time. So you could take a deep breath. You could feel the intensity of the emotion. You could say, okay, so you're not available to offer me emotional support right now. It's really that simple of a practice. But in this case, if you're well practiced, that might be the thing you repeat back. It's word for word what you heard. But the power of this practice, repeating back what you understand, aka what are you interpreting in that person's speaking, is that it can unveil the unconscious thought pattern. So instead of you just getting hooked into it, it's a way to consciously bring it to the surface and have it be spoken and acknowledged by both parties in the room. So if we're to repeat that example, and I say, hey, I'm not available to give emotional support right now, from your triggered brain, you could feel so deeply hurt by that. And then you might say, oh, so you're saying that you don't love me. Now that's a conversation starter because we're not on the same page. The power of this practice is that it helps you get on the same page. And you might go back and forth 4 or 5 times before you get on the same page. But the whole idea with this practice is that you do not move forward in the conversation until you get on the same page. So my response would be, oh, I love you so much. It's just that, I just did 3 sessions and I've held so much emotional space. I'm out of spoons. I really need to reset before I'm able to hold space for you again. And I would really love to. I just need 20 minutes to myself before I feel recharged again. Okay. And then the person who's triggered can say what they're understanding. And really, half the battle of repeating back what you're understanding is how emotionally charged are you? Because when you're triggered, it's hard to just read things at face value or to read them neutrally. It's natural to interpret things from your emotions. So that is the power of this practice, is repeating back what you understand to get on the same page and then respond. Because if you're doing that practice it's not going to continue escalating in a fight. There will be no threat to end the relationship, because how could you threaten to end the relationship when someone is telling, I love you and I want to hold space for you, right? I just don't have the spoons in this exact moment. So the unconscious pattern is lashing out or attacking when you're feeling triggered, taking it personally, emotionally reacting to the interpretation. And the conscious communication pattern, the antidote to that, is pausing, taking a breath, repeating back, what did you understand before you move forward in the conversation? The second unconscious communication pattern we're going to look at is criticizing or complaining instead of requesting. And I can't help but laugh because I fall into this one. Like I said, it's not about perfection, people, okay? It's about noticing it and working with it. So let me give an example first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what is the impact that it has. So I'll give you a personal example. The other day, I kind of made a jab at my partner, poor thing, because there was like a mess in the living room, and I had been seeing this mess for a few days and hadn't been saying anything. Because my unconscious pattern is like for me, it was not safe to voice my needs growing up, right? And so I have this pattern of like sitting on them and not expressing them enough, you know? And so this happened. I was noticing something for a few days. That tension inside of me was building, the irritation or the frustration of an unmet need, just to feel a sense of peace in the home. Because personally, when things are messy, I start to feel that in my emotional field. It starts to feel like kind of chaotic or like scattered. It doesn't feel grounding. It feels overwhelming to me. So I made some kind of comment. I don't even remember what I said, but it hurt her. And I was so unconscious in that moment because I was like, oh, did I just say something hurtful? You know, like, but it's about noticing that and owning it. But what I essentially did was I attacked her character, which is a horrible practice. Don't do that. Don't recommend. But this is a common unconscious pattern that people fall into. Like, you have a need. Maybe the actual request in the situation is like, hey, babe, I noticed there's a mess in the living room. Would you be able to clean up your things? You know? And then you can agree on by when do you want to clean up the things, right? So it can feel collaborative. It's not like a demand. But the unconscious pattern that a lot of people fall into is they, instead of making a clear request, you might just judge someone's character and say, oh God, you're so messy, right? And what you're doing there is you're complaining. It's not making a request. But underneath that complaint or that criticism is a need, right? And the request comes from that need. So you're just not getting to the deeper level of communication there, right? Which is like, hey, I have a need for some peace in the home. Can you please clean this up by 5 p.m. or by tomorrow or whatever, right? So what happens when you criticize or complain instead of requesting? Obviously, it does not facilitate trust, and it feels really disconnecting. So when you're criticizing instead of just making a request, what you're doing is you're turning against your partner. You're jabbing them or kind of attacking them instead of just communicating what you need. And, you know, there's a lot that goes into building trust, but one of the main components is collaboration, feeling like you're on the same team. And so if you're expressing your need by attacking or jabbing, that's not building trust because you're turning against your partner. That is not collaborative. In the meanwhile, when you're complaining, again, you're expressing a need. You're not saying, this is what I need, but you're very passively addressing the need by complaining. But if you've ever been around someone who complains a lot, you know actually how heavy that feels. The energy of complaining is heavy. And so this could actually trigger defensiveness in your partner if you're just complaining instead of requesting. And when someone gets defensive, you might not feel heard in your complaint. And so this could actually escalate into a fight, because most fights are just a result of people feeling unheard, which is why, back to that first practice, repeating back what you understand before you move on can really de-escalate a lot of fights, and it can prevent a lot of fights from breaking out. It's a powerful practice. So that's a second unconscious communication pattern, is criticizing or complaining instead of requesting. And the antidote is to, of course, notice in yourself, oh my goodness, am I criticizing or am I complaining instead of requesting? What is the need here? That is always going to carry you forward What is the need? It's okay if you don't know the answer right away, but that is the question to help facilitate trust, to create ease and enjoyment of your long-term relationship. You do not need to get to that point where 20 years down the line, you want to kill each other, or you're like, oh my God, I love this person, but I hate them. Like, you actually don't have to feel that. That's totally optional. That is the old world paradigm. So this practice of understanding what is my need and making a request is going to bring you to that long-term relationship, but it's going to get more and more delicious over time. It's going to feel easier over time, and the trust is going to deepen over time, which is so yummy. The third unconscious communication pattern I want to share is taking responsibility for your partner's emotions. This one can get really sticky, and this is where nonviolent communication can really come in handy. So if you're unfamiliar with the nonviolent communication framework, the whole intention of it is to make communication as neutral as possible. Not to say that you're eliminating emotions. There is space for the emotions, but you're not attacking. You're not weaponizing the emotions against each other, and you're not taking responsibility for how the other person's feeling, but you are expressing care and compassion for how the other person is feeling. The nonviolent communication framework I really resonate with. Not everyone resonates with it, to be honest with you. Some people find it really like awkward, or they feel like inauthentic. I think that's a natural phase of doing anything that's new, you know? So to me, it's a awkward growth period that's worth going through. But I personally really resonate with the nonviolent communication framework because it really is all about how can you stay on the same team and also make space for your feelings and get your needs met, you know? So if you want to go deeper into that framework, there is a book by Marshall Rosenberg, and it's called Nonviolent Communication. I recommend. But what does taking responsibility for your partner's emotions look like? It means you're making me feel this way. You're doing this to me. And so naturally, when you're pointing the finger, even if your fingers are not pointing in the conversation, you're verbally pointing the finger, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm getting jealous because my partner is texting someone who I feel threatened by. I could say, you're hurting me. You're making me jealous. How dare you text Abigail because you know this hurts me, right? Not a very collaborative way to communicate. There's a valid need underneath that, and we'll get to that. But naturally, when you're pointing the finger, metaphorically or energetically, what it does is it triggers defensiveness. And what does defensiveness do? It makes you feel unheard, and it can escalate into a fight. And so that's why taking responsibility for each other's emotions, blaming your emotions on someone else, it's just a recipe for disaster. You know, it's such like a war paradigm kind of energy, because it's like you're turning against each other, right? You're doing this to me. If we look at using the nonviolent communication framework, I might say something like, you know, when you text Abigail, I am feeling scared that your connection actually has the potential to grow stronger than your my connection. And that is scary to me because I really want to build a life with you. Talk about conscious communication. That might take you like some time to figure that out, right? But that's what I'm saying. Part of conscious relating is getting to the deeper layers of communication, you know? So there's a whole NVC formula that you follow. You name the observation, right? So when you're texting with this person, that's the neutral thing that happens. Instead of saying, you're doing this to me, it's saying, when this neutral observation happens, this is how it makes me feel, right? And then you get to the need. In this case, it's like, I need to feel secure in this relationship because I want you to understand how important this relationship is to me. And then I want this to be a lifelong relationship, right? And the thing that feels really connecting about getting to the deeper layers and making space for your emotions is that, you know, if I'm saying like, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling threatened by this relationship, in my opinion, fear is one of the most tender emotions you can experience on earth. You know, it's such a raw, vulnerable feeling. And so the more vulnerable you can get in what you're communicating, the more connecting it's going to be, the less defensiveness it's going to trigger in the other person. So the third unconscious communication pattern is taking responsibility for each other's emotions, where you're essentially blaming like, hey, this feeling I have in my body, You triggered it, and so you caused it. You're responsible for it. It's your fault. Whereas the conscious way of relating is getting to the deeper layer of what is happening. So when this happens, this is what I feel, and this is why it's important to me. This is what I need around it. And like I said, you can go way deeper into this framework. It's a very common, popular framework. You can find resources online, but there's also a whole book you can get into if you want to get nerdy about it. There's actually a fourth communication pattern I want to share with you, and we'll leave it here because, like I said, we could spend hours talking about this stuff, but this one feels common enough to where I do want to address it. And this falls into the category of under-communicating. But particularly, it shows up when you are expecting or wanting your partner to just know what you want or just know what you need. So there's something you're not communicating, but you're like assuming that if you are to be loved, then they should just know these things. An example is, let's say you go out to like a party and you're tired, you want to go home. Why isn't my partner picking up on this? My partner should notice that I want to go home. So there's something that's not being said. You're not advocating or really taking responsibility for your feelings and your needs. I'm tired. I need to rest. I'm ready to go home, right? And so you might take it personal. You might feel like angry at your partner or neglected or abandoned. It creates a conflict because there's something that you're like, well, if I have to communicate it, then it defeats the purpose. They should just know things, right? Very unconscious pattern and such a part of pop culture. Another example is like, my partner should know when to ask me for sex or not. I shouldn't have to be put in the position to say no. Or, that good old classic situation, you ask your partner, hey, is something wrong? No, but obviously something's wrong, right? And so the idea is like, well, you should know something's wrong with me. I shouldn't have to tell you, because if I tell you, then it defeats the purpose. I don't feel loved, right? So very unconscious way of communicating, because there's something that's not being said. There's something that's being implied, or something that you want to be assumed as an expression of love. And look, I was born and raised in the US. My ancestors are of European descent. I know in different cultures, there's different norms. Take it or leave it. This is just my perspective. It's not the ultimate truth. So if it resonates, great. And if it doesn't, just ignore it. It's totally fine. But this is my perspective. I really value direct communication without making it aggressive, right? There's something neutral about just owning your wants and your needs and your feelings and your needs. So we'll leave it there for today. I hope you got something out of this for yourself. Let me know in the comments, which one of these unconscious patterns do you fall in the most? And which ones am I missing that maybe you've experienced a growth period around that you're feeling really proud of? I love celebrating. Make sure to subscribe and click the bell for notifications if you want to stay in touch with the series. The next episode I'm releasing is all about sex within the context of conscious monogamy. What are those common patterns you fall into that can quietly erode your relationship versus what are the conscious ways of relating to sex? If you're nerding out on this stuff and you can't get enough, you might be interested in my signature course. It's called The Conscious Couple. It is a boot camp that really helps you put these ideas into practice. So the emphasis is on sharpening your relationship skills and really working with your patterns in a really well-held container so you can feel the change over time and you can feel the deepening in your relationship. It's very satisfying. Registration opens in May, and if you join the waitlist, you can save a huge chunk of money on it, to be honest with you. If you're interested, you can go to consciousrelating.org, click on events, you'll see it there. There's also a link in the description below. If you're curious about the conscious couple, but you want to get a taste of what it could be like, then check out my upcoming course, Love Without Losing Yourself. We're going to meet for 4 weeks in May, and the emphasis is all about maintaining sovereignty in your relationship so you can continue deepening your bond over time instead of unconsciously slipping into those norms that disconnect. Again, you can go to consciousrelating.org, click on events, you'll see it there, or click on the link in the description below. And if you're looking for more personalized support, I do also offer couple sessions. You just go to my website, consciousrelating.org, or click the link in the description to learn more about that. Appreciate you being here. Peace be with you.